It was August 1999, and Baghdad burned under the weight of summer, the air suffocating as usual. I sat in my small living room, stirring tea, the gentle clink of the spoon breaking the silence. My children, Ali and Faye, quietly finished breakfast. Everything felt ordinary, deceptively so. In Saddam's Iraq, even the air lied. A knock shattered the illusion, not a request but an order, sharp, demanding. 3 men in uniform burst into my home, rifles pointed, eyes hard. They didn't introduce themselves, they didn't explain, they simply said, "Come with us." Fear gripped me. The teacup trembled in my hands. My son looked up, searching my face for answers I couldn't give. My daughter wrapped her arms around mine. I rose, legs trembling, voice a whisper, "Why? What have I done?" They didn't reply. They didn't have to. In Saddam's Iraq, being innocent didn't protect you. Asking questions was dangerous. Fear was law. I was pulled to my feet, my abaya caught on the table leg as one man yanked me forward. My children started crying, not with screams, but soft sobs that pierced my heart. I turned for one last look. I tried to memorize them, their breath, their hope. I wanted to tell them it would be okay, but I knew better. I didn't know where I was going, only that people taken like this often disappeared. Forever. I was the granddaughter of Jafar Pasha Al Askari, a founding father of Iraq, and Sati al-Husri, a man who sparked Arab nationalism. My mother, Munira, had held political office. I had grown up among ministers and monarchs. None of that mattered now. As the soldiers shoved me into a black car, I realized my bloodline couldn't save me. My silence, my loyalty, my education, all worthless here. The car sped through Baghdad. My thoughts raced faster. Had someone used my printing shop to create something against the regime? I printed harmless things, menus, invitations. Was this a mistake? It didn't matter. In a country ruled by fear, mistakes were fatal. We stopped near a windowless compound. I knew its name, Baladiyat, secret police headquarters. A place people entered, but didn't leave. The guards dragged me inside. The doors slammed shut. No beatings, no words, just silence and suspicion. I was handed to a guard who looked at me like I was already guilty. He pointed to a corridor that reeked of sweat and pain. We walked in silence past locked cells. I heard moaning, chains, flesh against concrete. Finally, he unlocked a heavy door and pushed it open. Inside, cell 52. A concrete room. No windows, no beds. 17 women looked up, suspicion and exhaustion in their eyes. Some barefoot, some in torn abayas, their faces hollow, but alive. "Another one," someone whispered. The door clanged shut behind me. I was no longer Mayada Al Askari. I was prisoner number 18. For the first hour, I didn't move. I sat against the cold wall of cell 52, too numb to cry, too stunned to speak. Around me, the women stayed mostly silent. Some closed their eyes. Others stared through me like I wasn't even there. Later, one of them approached. Her name was Samara. Her eyes were gentle, her voice thick with sorrow. "You'll get used to it," she said quietly. "The rats don't bite if you don't scream." I didn't respond. I couldn't. That night I tried to pray, but the words wouldn't come. I closed my eyes and thought of Ali and Faye. Were they safe? Had they eaten? Would they think I abandoned them? Sleep came in fragments, broken by screams from the corridor, the clink of metal, and the dull thuds of fists on flesh. Women shifted and murmured in the dark. Some sobbed softly. Others held each other. I had entered a world beneath the world, a place where pain was constant and hope was illegal. But I was not alone. And buried deep under my fear, something stirred. A flicker of resolve. If I wanted to survive, if I ever hoped to return to my children, I needed strength. Not just mine, but that of the women around me. Their stories, my heritage, my faith. The walls were thick, but my memory was thicker. They had taken my freedom, but not yet my voice. Before the regime tore me from my home, I had lived in a very different Iraq. A place where conversations stretched beneath fig trees, where coffee was poured with grace, and where books carried the weight of dreams. I belonged to a family whose names were stitched into the identity of the country. My grandfather Jafar Pasha helped shape modern Iraq. He fought beside T.E. Lawrence during the Great Arab Revolt. Twice he was prime minister. He died a martyr, gunned down for standing against violence. My other grandfather, Saddam Al-Husri, was a philosopher who helped define Arab nationalism. His words filled school books across the Middle East. He believed in unity and education as paths to freedom. My mother, Munira, was the first woman to serve in Iraq's cabinet after the monarchy. Strong, elegant, and brilliant, she taught me to speak my truth, but never to waste words. We lived in a world of crystal, embroidered linens, and political debate. My siblings and I attended the best schools. Our family moved in circles of power and poetry. It was an Iraq many can no longer imagine. An Iraq of opera houses and diplomacy, not dungeons and dictatorship. As a child, I met kings, watched history unfold at dinner tables. My world was one of belief, perhaps naive belief, in honor and principle. I even met Saddam Hussein once. He was rising through the Ba'ath Party ranks, all ambition and charm. He shook my hand, smiled, a smile that, in hindsight, should have chilled me. Back then, the salons grew quiet. Politics became whispers. Neighbors stopped visiting. Books vanished. Fear thickened like smoke over Baghdad. In the 70s and 80s, the regime clamped down hard. The war with Iran bled us dry. I divorced during those years. A private heartbreak amidst public collapse. I opened a small printing business to support my children. Flyers, menus, brochures, nothing political. But in Saddam's Iraq, it didn't matter. Guilt wasn't required for punishment, only visibility was. I taught my children caution: look, listen, never repeat. I hid books, smiled when I wanted to scream. I built them a cage without bars and prayed they might still grow wings. I thought our family's legacy might protect me, but I was wrong. In Saddam's Iraq, history was not a shield, it was a target. Cell 52 was a cement tomb, a world stripped of daylight and identity. 17 women, now 18 with me, sat or lay in silence, their faces shadowed by hunger, their bodies wrapped in worn black fabric that no longer resembled clothing. There was no light, only the flicker of a dying bulb from the hallway. We had no names, only numbers. We had no case files, no trials, no sentences. We simply vanished from the world, swallowed by the regime. We were not prisoners in the eyes of the state. We were phantoms. They called us the Shadow Women. That first night, I barely slept. The moans from the hall, the distant shrieks, the sound of chains, the rats. But most of all, the presence of the women, silent, mourning, but alive. They shifted gently, making room for me. In the days that followed, I began to know them. Not by who they had become, but by who they had been. Zainab, once a schoolteacher, was taken after inquiring about her brother's arrest. She had been pregnant. The baby, they said, was stillborn. She never saw the body. Noura arrested because she hadn't taken down a portrait of the former king from her father's study. Hainan, accused of insulting the regime after joking about the Ba'ath Party at a family dinner. Shala, only 16, had refused to marry a man with ties to Uday Hussein. Her punishment was silence, beaten into her. Amira, a mother of 3, had organized a neighborhood cleanup. The regime called it anti-government propaganda. She was tortured for her civic pride. None of these women had fought. None had plotted. Most had never even raised their voices. But in Saddam's Iraq, silence could be considered sedition. A glance could be rebellion. A woman with dignity was always a threat. Each morning, the cell door would groan open. A name would be called. The woman would vanish into the hall. Hours, days. When she returned, if she returned, she came back broken, limping, bleeding, changed. We never asked, but at night we shared the pain. Not for pity, but to prove we still existed. Our minds hadn't been erased. There was no order in that place. No time, no justice. But within the torment, something began to grow. A kind of sisterhood, a shared resistance. We told stories, not just of what happened to us, but of who we had once been. One woman had been a folkloric dancer, Another accepted to medical school before the war. A seamstress, a poet, a mother, a daughter. We told these stories like prayers, over and over, to keep our past from vanishing, to protect a flicker of our future. Samara insisted on it. She believed stories were survival. She was the soul of Cell 52, though her body bore more scars than most. She had been here the longest, and yet somehow she had kept her spirit whole. When someone cried, Samara sat with her. When someone screamed, she held their hand. When someone returned from the torture rooms, she whispered verses until they could breathe again. We shared everything: stale bread, a rag for a bandage, the warmth of our bodies. We shared silence. We shared dreams. When my turn came, they asked me to speak, to tell them about the Iraq I had grown up in, about poets and palaces, about my grandfathers and the dreams they chased. At first, I resisted. It felt wrong to speak of marble floors when we had none. But Samara pressed my hand. Your stories remind us of the Iraq we once believed in, she said. So I told them about my mother, about jasmine and songs, about music by the Tigris, about a country that once believed in beauty. When I finished, no one envied me. They thanked me. Because in a place built to erase us, stories became light, and we needed every flicker we could find. We never spoke of it aloud, but we all knew the guards remembered every face. Sooner or later, they called every name. It was never a question of if, only when. One morning, it was mine. The door creaked open. A guard stepped inside. He looked straight at me and barked, "You, come!" I froze. The women turned toward me, their eyes filled with a familiar, quiet dread. Samara touched my hand. "Don't speak unless you must," she whispered. "Don't fight, don't cry, not if you can help it." I stood, legs trembling. My mouth was dry. I couldn't think, couldn't pray. I walked into the hall. 2 guards waited. One tied a filthy blindfold over my eyes. The other grabbed my arm and shoved me forward. We descended a staircase that seemed to spiral into the underworld. Every footstep sounded like the tolling of a bell in my chest. The air turned cold, heavy, silent. A door opened. The smell hit me first. Metal, rot, and pain. It wasn't just a room. It was a place designed to erase the human soul. I was thrown into a chair. Metal arms dug into my skin. My hands were bound. My feet couldn't touch the floor. The questioning began. Who gave you the leaflets? Who funded your shop? Where are the names? I don't know, I said. I printed menus and wedding invitations. Wrong answer. A blow landed across my face. I couldn't tell if it was leather or a wrapped fist. My head snapped, my lips split. They screamed my name, my family, my bloodline. You think your history protects you? You think your grandfather's ghost will save you? Another kick. The chair rocked. My ribs lit up with pain. Then came the whip. Lashes of rubber studded with metal. It tore through fabric, then skin. I stopped counting after 12. Agony became a tunnel. I no longer knew what hour it was or what day. There was no space in my mind for anything but pain. They wanted me to confess to crimes I hadn't committed. They didn't care about facts. They only wanted fear. Then came the wires. They tied them to my toes, then my fingers. The electric shock jolted through me. My body convulsed. My teeth clamped together so hard I thought they would crack. I smelled my own skin burning. That was when I screamed. Not because I wanted to, but because I couldn't stop it. They left me tied to the chair for hours. I drifted in and out of awareness. In the distance, I heard a guard laughing, talking about a football match. They joked while I bled. Eventually, I was dragged back up the stairs. I don't remember walking. I think I collapsed. I only remember the moment the cell door opened and the women gasped. Samara caught me before I hit the floor. Someone wiped my face. Another held water to my lips. No one asked what they had done. They already knew. For days I couldn't sleep, couldn't sit, could barely breathe. I didn't scream anymore, not because I was brave, but because I had nothing left. And yet, I listened. The women whispered to me. They told jokes, sang lullabies, rubbed my back with what little cloth we had. Their kindness was the only medicine we had. I would later learn that what happened to me was mild. Some had been raped, others mutilated. One woman had her fingernails torn out. Another's body was burned from the inside. And yet they called me lucky. In Saddam's Iraq, surviving with your body mostly intact was considered a blessing. I thought of my children every hour. I pictured their faces. I wondered if they believed I was dead, if they were still waiting by the door. That image hurt more than the whip, but I held on. Because I remembered who I was. I was Mayada, daughter of Munira, granddaughter of Jafar and Sati. They could break my body, but they could not take my past. As my body healed slowly from the torture, the stories of the other women became a lifeline. In the absence of time, in the belly of darkness, we stitched together our identities through memory. There was no justice in Cell 52, but there was solidarity, no comfort but compassion. The women became my mirrors, my anchors, my proof that we still had voices, even if the world refused to hear them. Samara, always the quiet strength in the center, kept us grounded. She had endured the worst of it and still remained unshaken. When someone trembled in their sleep, she held them. When someone returned bruised, she whispered verses from the Quran until their breathing steadied. Each woman had her own invisible war. Noura, the teacher, had dared to ask about her husband's disappearance. For that, she was torn from her home in the middle of the night, her children screaming behind her. Amira had led a neighborhood cleanup day. The regime saw it as a silent protest. She was taken, beaten, and returned with her fingernails missing. Shala had been a teenager with large eyes and a soft voice. She refused to marry a Ba'ath Party official. One day she vanished from her school desk and never went home. Fatima had been seen speaking to a foreign journalist. She said only, "Life is hard now." The next day, she disappeared. Zainab had been pregnant when she was arrested. Her crime, owning one of her late father's books, which referenced Iraq's monarchy. The guards beat her until she lost the baby. She never saw the child, not even the body. None of them had raised arms. None had spoken against the government in public. But in Saddam's Iraq, suspicion was enough. Kindness was defiance. Dignity was danger. Each morning brought a new fear. The door would open, a name called, a woman would rise, her movements stiff with pain or terror. She would disappear. Sometimes she returned, limping, bleeding, silent. Sometimes she didn't. We never asked what happened. But in the night, under the shelter of whispered words, the truth emerged. Pain shared not to relive it, but to survive it. Stories became armor. We recounted the lives we had before. The gardens, the family dinners, the books we read, the lovers we had. These weren't fantasies. They were resistance. In a place built to strip us of identity, remembering was our rebellion. We taught each other songs. Lullabies from Mosul, ballads from Basra, resistance chants from Najaf. We learned to pray in silence. We tracked time by the cycle of screams and the distance between interrogations. We counted each other's bruises, kept watch over one another during sleep. When a woman received extra bread, she divided it evenly. When someone lost hope, we huddled closer. We celebrated small things, a faint smile, a remembered poem, the return of someone thought lost. Samara reminded us often, we are not what they say we are. They called us spies, traitors, criminals. But we were not. We were women, survivors, witnesses. And in our silence, we carried the truth. We endured. We remembered. And because of that, we resisted. There were moments in that cell when silence was louder than screams. Not from the absence of sound, but from the weight of memory pressing in. At night, when the moans subsided and the guards' boots faded, I often lay awake, staring at the concrete ceiling. I let my mind drift beyond the filth, the pain, the fear, and in those moments, my past returned. It slipped through the cracks in Cell 52 like a faint breeze, not to haunt me, but to hold me. I remembered my childhood in 1960s Baghdad, a city full of light, ambition, and promise. Wide streets shaded by palms, the smell of roasted nuts, the sound of fountain water and laughter. Our home was filled with books and politics. My grandfather's medals glimmered in their cases. My mother's heels clicked confidently along marble floors. The scent of her jasmine perfume lingered in every room. We were more than privileged. We were part of Iraq's foundation. My grandfather Jafar helped shape the country with his mind and his sword. He dreamed of sovereignty and dignity. He died fighting for both. My other grandfather Sati wrote the textbooks that taught generations of Arab children what it meant to belong. His voice echoed in classrooms across the Middle East. My mother Munira shattered barriers, a woman in politics when such things were unheard of. She raised me to think, to speak, to never bow. I had once sat at tables with kings. I had danced in halls filled with scholars. I had believed in honor, in progress, in Iraq. And now I lay on a mat soaked with suffering, prisoner number 18. In that cell, everything I thought had made me strong, my name, my history, my education, had become a target. I remembered the day I met Saddam Hussein. I was young, he was rising fast. Charismatic, smiling. But behind that smile, there was something hollow, something hungry. Years later, I saw that same hunger in the eyes of the guards who beat us. It was not just power they wanted. It was obedience, silence, erasure. I remembered my printing shop, the modest place I opened after my divorce. I printed menus, flyers, programs. Nothing controversial. I kept my head down. And yet someone had slipped a leaflet through my machines, a message I never saw, a line I never wrote. But in Saddam's Iraq, ignorance was not an excuse. It was a crime. I remembered the day I unlocked the door to that shop for the first time. How proud I felt. How free. Now I understood. There was no safety. Not for teachers, not for doctors, not for children, not even for women who had done everything right. Even freedom could be fatal. I remembered one final party in the 1970s. The music, the perfume, the food. My mother laughing, my cousins dancing. That was the last time our house felt joyful. That was the last time I believed we could escape what was coming. In cell 52, I held on to those memories like lifelines. Not to escape, but to endure. Samara once told me, the mind is the last refuge. Guard it. So I did. I remembered French poetry, debates over coffee, the click of my mother's typewriter, the scent of old paper in my grandfather's study. Each memory became a shield. In that place, time didn't move, but memory did. It danced behind my eyes, proving that I had lived once and might live again. There are tortures that bruise the flesh and those that bruise the soul. It had been weeks since my arrest when the cell door creaked open and a guard pointed at me. "You have a visitor." I froze. A visitor? Those words had become foreign. No one had visitors in Baladiyat. No one was allowed contact with the outside world. My heart pounded. Could it be my children? Had someone found me? Had my mother come demanding answers like she once did in cabinet meetings? The other women stared, equal parts hopeful and afraid. Samara leaned in. "Whatever happens," she said gently, "remember who you are." I followed the guard, each step heavier than the last. My back ached, my legs faltered, my mind spun. They led me into a clean room, so pristine it felt surreal. White walls, a simple table, 2 chairs. On one side sat a man in olive uniform, sharp-eyed and calm. He wore medals, his posture relaxed, his smile practiced. "Sit," he said. I obeyed. He studied me for a moment. "Mayada Al Askari," he said, as if tasting the name. A name full of history. Granddaughter of Jafar, daughter of Munira, an impressive bloodline. He smiled again, but there was no warmth. Only calculation. Then his voice shifted. "None of that matters here." I swallowed. "You made a mistake," he continued, "or perhaps someone made it for you. Either way, mistakes are dangerous." He tapped the table. "A pamphlet becomes a revolution. A whisper becomes a fire. We can't risk it." "I did nothing," I whispered. "They all say that," he replied, almost amused. Then he leaned closer. "Do your children miss you? Do they cry for you? Do they pray? Or have they given up?" His words struck deeper than any blow. "I could bring them here," he added, his tone casual. Just for a visit, just a reminder. Tears welled in my eyes. "But I won't," he said, standing, "because I am not cruel." He bent low, so close I could smell his cologne, and whispered, "You are nothing, not your name, not your family, not even your children, nothing." Then he turned and walked out, his boots making no sound. The door clicked shut behind him. I didn't cry right away. They led me back to cell 52 like a shadow. The women looked up as I entered. I shook my head. "Not my children," I said softly, "just a monster." They made room for me. Samara touched my shoulder. We said nothing more. That night, I couldn't sleep. I replayed every word, every gesture, every silence. It wasn't just the beatings that broke people. It was the confusion, the veiled threats, the illusion of mercy, the way they twisted love into a weapon. That day, something changed. Hope, once flickering inside me, dimmed to an ember. I was not a prisoner waiting for trial. I was a symbol, a warning, a lesson for others who dared to stand out. But even as despair curled around me, I remembered Samara's voice. They can't make us disappear if we keep telling each other who we are. So I whispered to myself, I am Mayada, daughter of Munira, granddaughter of visionaries, a mother, a witness. They could take my body, but they would not take my story. In Baladiyat, time didn't pass in days or hours. It passed in disappearances. There were no calendars, no clocks, no sunlight. We marked time by the rhythm of screams, the metal clang of doors, and the footsteps that approached but didn't always retreat. Every few days, the door to cell 52 would creak open. A name would be called, sometimes a number. A woman would rise slowly, often needing help to stand. We would watch her leave, our breath held like a prayer. And then we waited. Sometimes she returned, limping, hollow-eyed. Sometimes she didn't. At first I told myself they had been released, that their innocence had been proven, that they were walking in gardens, reunited with children, sipping tea in their kitchens. But eventually, even hope becomes heavy, too heavy to carry. We stopped pretending. They were gone. Not buried, not transferred, not even acknowledged. Erased. Their names weren't written, their bodies weren't found, their families were told nothing. They simply ceased to exist. In cell 52, we never spoke their names after they vanished, not because we forgot them, but because naming them might summon more attention, more punishment. The regime didn't just erase bodies, it erased memory. But we remembered in silence. We kept their places during meals. We included them in stories. We hummed the tunes they once sang. We held space for them, not in words, but in the way we breathed. There was Layla, who always smiled despite the bruises. She stroked my arm when I couldn't sleep. She was accused of aiding her brother's escape, though she hadn't seen him in years. One night they called her name. Her mat stayed empty. Rana, barely 20, wanted to be an engineer. Her father had written an essay questioning the war. First they took him, then they came for her. She never returned. We called one woman Mariam, though we never knew her real name. A mother of 5 arrested because her husband whispered doubts at work. They couldn't find him, so they took her. She sang lullabies in the dark, as though her voice could reach her children across prison walls. Salima barely spoke. Her silence was a language of its own. She prayed every hour, believing each word built a shield. One morning she kissed the floor and left. She never came back. Each woman left behind a hole that could not be filled. A sound, a touch, a laugh that no longer echoed. We never knew what became of them. Were they executed, tortured to death, moved to another black site, or left to rot in a deeper cell? We didn't know if they still whispered our names as we whispered theirs. That was the cruelest torture of all, because death ends pain. But disappearance? It never stops. Sometimes I imagined it was me who vanished. My mother asking questions, only to be told I was never there. My children growing up believing I had walked away. Forgotten not just by the regime, but by those I loved most. So I clung to memory. I made myself remember every vanished woman. Layla tapping her knee when nervous. Rana laughing while folding her blanket. Mariam kissing her palm before sleep. Salima lifting her eyes to the ceiling with every prayer. I had no photos, no records, no proof they existed. Only my memory. And in Saddam's Iraq, to remember was to resist. As long as one person remembers your name, Samara once said, you have not disappeared. So I remembered them. In my heart, in my silence, where the regime could never reach. Every time I felt myself slipping, I whispered them back to life. They were gone, but they were not lost, because I carried their stories. And as long as I told them, they endured. It happened without warning. After nearly a month in cell 52, the door opened one morning. A guard stepped in, eyes blank. He scanned the room, pointed at me. You, get up. I blinked, disoriented. My limbs stiff, my head pounding. My heart raced. Samara stirred. Did they call your name? I nodded. The other women watched silently. We all knew. Being taken didn't always mean punishment. Sometimes it meant something else. But what? I stood. My body trembled. I gathered my few belongings, a scarf, a torn cloth I had used as a pillow. I didn't know what to say. Should I hug them? Say goodbye? But no one moved. We had seen too many disappear. Samara took my hand. Her fingers were cold. Don't forget us, she said. I won't. I promised. The door slammed shut behind me. I was led through corridors I barely recognized, past rooms where screams had echoed, past guards who didn't meet my eyes. No one explained anything. They handed me my abaya, told me simply, "You're going home." Home. As if that word still had meaning. Outside, the sunlight pierced my skin. I hadn't seen daylight in weeks. It felt like fire. I raised a hand to shield my eyes and noticed how thin I had become. My fingers like twigs, my wrists marked with fading bruises. A car waited. Inside was a man I vaguely recognized, a Bath Party official who had once visited my print shop. He said nothing, just handed me a folded paper. I didn't read it. We drove through Baghdad. Life moved on outside the window. People shopping, children laughing, the city unchanged. But I was not. I was a ghost passing through the living. When we reached my home, the car stopped. I stepped out just as the sun was setting. My mother opened the door. For a moment, she couldn't speak. Her hand flew to her chest. Then she pulled me into her arms and held me. No words. None were needed. Then I saw Ali and Faye. They ran toward me, but slowed as they saw my face. The cuts, the bruises, the emptiness in my eyes. I knelt and hugged them tightly. Their warmth, their smell, their little hands. They were real. I was home, but I would never be free again. The days blurred. I couldn't sleep. Every sound made me flinch. I had nightmares. In them, the cell door opened again, and they dragged me back. I couldn't bear closed spaces. I jumped when someone raised their voice. I couldn't hear the call to prayer without thinking of Samara whispering it through cracked lips. I tried to reopen my printing shop, but it had already been emptied. My clients had disappeared. My name had become a warning. People crossed the street when they saw me. Friends stopped calling. I had become a threat by association. In Saddam's Iraq, surviving prison wasn't a badge of honor, it was a stain. Even suspicion, however unfounded, was contagious. At night, I stared at the ceiling and whispered names into the dark. Layla, Rana, Maryam, Salima, Samara. Were they still alive? Had they been released like me? Or had they vanished, one by one, into the black hole that had nearly consumed me? I would never know. That was Baladiat's final cruelty. Not just the pain, not just the terror, but the silence it left behind. I tried to talk. I tried to tell my story to an old friend. She listened politely, then changed the subject. I saw the fear in her eyes, the calculation, the distance. I understood, and so I stopped speaking. But I did not forget. I had promised Samara. I had promised all of them. Their stories lived in me now, and I would not let the silence win. There are moments that wound the soul more deeply than any beating ever could. The pain I had endured behind the walls of cell 52 was real, etched into my skin, burned into my bones. But the wounds that lingered weren't always visible. They whispered through silence. In the way people averted their gaze when I passed. In the awkward pauses when someone asked, "How are you?" but didn't want an answer. I learned that surviving didn't make you a hero. Not in Saddam's Iraq. It made you suspect. People assumed you were broken. Or worse, tainted. I tried to resume life, to laugh with my children, to drink tea with my mother, but every part of me had been rewired. My eyes searched for threats. My ears never stopped listening. My body flinched before my mind caught up. The worst part was not knowing what had become of the women I had called sisters. Layla, with her soothing touch. Rana and her laughter. Maryam's lullabies. Salima's endless prayers. Samara, the heartbeat of our cell. Were they still alive? Had they been released? Had they been erased? That question carved holes inside me. I wanted to tell the world what had happened. I wanted to shout their names into every courtroom and square. But I couldn't. Not then. Not in a place where truth was punished. I once tried. I spoke to an old friend. She listened, eyes wide, mouth tight, and then she changed the subject. I saw the calculation in her glance. I understood. Fear still ruled. So I said nothing more. But I remembered. In every quiet moment, I closed my eyes and saw cell 52, the bruised faces, the shared prayers, the whispered songs. And I held on to what Samara had said. As long as someone speaks your name, you have not disappeared. So I spoke their names silently, every night, because memory was rebellion, and silence was surrender. This story, this book, is my testimony. It is my oath. It is the promise I made in the dark when we passed around bread and hope in equal measure. They tried to erase us, to bury us beneath secrecy and shame. But we are still here. We are not gone. We are not forgotten. We are not nothing. We are the daughters of Iraq. And even in chains, we endured. Even in silence, we screamed. Even in darkness, we remembered the light.